Hi listeners, Jason here. We're on the countdown to PHSCon 2025, where we bring some of the leading experts on the topic of psychosocial safety to Sydney for 2 full days on the 19th and 20th of June. With so many great speakers, industry case studies and networking opportunities for the 500 people in attendance, it is the psychosocial safety community event of the year. Highlights will surely include live podcast recordings with Adam Grant and Professor Rob Reiner, international insights from Mary Ann Bainton, Dr. I. David Daniels, Peter Kelly from Canada, the US and UK respectively, as well as entertainment from Jimmy Reese OAM. That's right, we've even got Jimmy Giggle. Early bird pricing is available for a limited time, so get in quick to secure discounted tickets for the conference, pre-conference masterclasses and the VIP dinner. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. I'm Peter Kelly. Today, unfortunately, Kate is not with us. She's got the dreaded flu, which is quite common in a cold country such as England. I hope that, however, she'll be listening to this once we broadcast, and she knows that we're thinking about her. It's a bit of a shell shock. Some of you may know I've been out in Australia, and I was at 28 degrees, and last night it was -1. So I'm sure my guest, who's going to introduce herself, will appreciate that because she's a New Zealander. So we have a sort of southern hemisphere loving going on here. So over to you, Sarah. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how long you've been in the UK. All the general little things.
Oh, thanks, Peter. We did have 19 degrees yesterday, so we did have sort of like a spring-like or summer-like day. Really, hopefully we'll have more of them. But thank you. Yes, I have. So I've been living in this country for 30 years now. Came over here, sort of left New Zealand to do the big sort of OE experience, and ended up in England working in finance for a number of years. In London and then in New York. And actually it was when I came back to the UK that I went back to university and invested in my career in psychology and went on to become a business psychologist and started my work in working around behaviour in the city and then moving into mental health. And that's where I started. I started working for one of the network partners of National Mind in the southeast here in Kent, which is where I live. And that sort of just rolled into the work that I do today, which is acting as a business psychologist, but also a consultant working around mental health and wellbeing with a particular interest in suicide awareness and prevention. So we did a lot of work when I was at Mind around suicide awareness and prevention with Kent County Council. We rolled out a huge program of education in the local county, which saw some staggering results actually, and interaction from members of the community organisations it was fantastic. And so my work has really extended into, I left working for the network partner and sort of absorbed myself in my own business really. And I work with organisations of all different sizes, national and international, helping them embed real sustainable change around the wellbeing of their staff. So that can mean writing bespoke and running training programs for them, to helping them determine what strategy and policy looks like, working with leaders and educating them about why this subject and change in an organisation is so fundamental. I'm a instructor for suicide first aid and also for MHFA England, so I utilise those programs in the work that I do, and also create bespoke programs for organisations. So, yeah, That's me in a nutshell, really.
It's, you sound rather busy then. No, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about the joint piece of work we're currently doing, which is an incredible opportunity. I mean, I think it's really important, just right from the outset. During this podcast, we will be talking at times about suicide. And please, if you've been affected by suicide in the past or have been personally touched by it, reach out with there's a whole sort of lot of resources that we can give you in direction as well. And hopefully we'll attach some of those to the end of the recording as well. So let's have a look at the first question. So you've been working with organizations around mental health and suicide prevention over a number of years. That means because we're both at that, we've been doing this for a long, long time. Have you seen changes in the way organizations respond, their motivation for it?
Yes, I have seen a change in motivation, a change in interest, and a change in action. Honestly, I think most of that, the change that we've seen in the last few years was prompted by COVID, to be perfectly honest. That's when we saw an influx of organizations coming in saying, what do we need to do now? How can we do something immediately to support our people? So that was where we sort of saw this massive escalation in interest in organizations looking after their people better. And as you know, there's a whole host of ways in which organizations can do that. But I think that was where we noticed the most significant increase in desire to change with organizations. I think prior to that, there was fantastic awareness. I know, we've spoken about fundamental changes that took place in the UK, like the Farmer Stevenson report that came out in 2017, and what organizations did on the back of that. And I think that created the curiosity and was the catalyst for a lot of changes in organizations. But it was a slow burn. I think that the retention and the turnover of staff that we saw in COVID, the amount of people that didn't come back to work post-COVID, and the tremendous struggles that organizations saw over that period of time really propelled the work that we do around mental health and wellbeing in organizations into a completely different level. And I think it's been up until very recently, actually. I think we've seen a bit of a slowdown in the last 12 months. And, obviously things are changing in the economy and there's different pressures on organizations. And very, very sadly, I think one of the first things to go in an organization is sort of training or well-being leads or investment in work around mental health and wellbeing, very, very sadly. But, prior to that, I think there's been really significant changes. I don't think that they're enough. I don't think they're vast enough. But yeah, I think the last 4 years we've seen quite significant change in interest and action. What do you think?
But it's not at the pace that I
Nice shirt.
Thank you. I just thought to bring a bit of colour into me. There have been changes. I've been disappointed about some of the changes and some of the direction that we go in, and it just feel a bit tokenistic, when people are dumping well-being roles when actually there's some, there's the well-being and the psych health and safety. We are getting evidence of change. So I think I'd agree with your sort of assessment. I think we were on a trajectory, and I think as we've spoken in previously on some of these podcasts, the pandemic kind of pushed forward some areas. Sadly, it's also reinforced some of the stuff that we've seen, which is people are going back to old behaviours. But yeah, so it's interesting in that sense. I've watched over the years from when we originally were involved in you doing the management standards right through to the work in the EU, where I thought we were making progress, but or maybe I'm just becoming older now.
I think the cost of living and where we are in the world and what's taking place in the world is really making organizations look at their bottom line, actually. But I think business concern around sort of workplace mental health is growing because there's a growing body of evidence on financial costs associated with poor health. I mean, we know what the statistics are like in the UK at the moment. So there's a greater awareness by the public, by leadership in organisations, and by investors in organisations too, about what they're doing to look after their people better, and the link between cost and engagement, creativity, productivity. And I think companies are learning that better workplace mental health is potentially material to sort of long-term value creation. So, very, very sadly, we're talking about the people and looking after the people and making the people well, and making sure that they have the right tools and the right infrastructure in place to be well at work. But when we're looking at organisations, and if we're looking at organisational mental health, we're looking at the bottom line, and it comes down to people and money, or people versus money for organisations. And I think what we're seeing a lot more of, sort of, when we talk about the change in 2017, and then the initiation of the reports that Deloitte are producing, sometimes twice a year, sometimes annually, really sort of pinning down the statistics and the figures linked to the demographics of workplaces across industry sectors. I think that's making a real change for people. It's prompting organisations to sort of sit up and take stock.
It's always good, isn't it, and support whatever that we've sort of been doing. I'm going to ask you the next question. Can you discuss the current work that you're involved with in developing a standard guide for suicide prevention, and why you think this is needed and now, and how wonderful your convener is?
I was just going to say, you should be, this is a question I should be asking you. You're the convener of the drafting panel for the standard. I can tell you why I think it's needed. I mean, it's always been needed. And why are we doing it now? I think the statistics tell the story. 7,000 people dying by suicide a year. That's the reason. And the knock-on impact of people that are bereaved by suicide. Upwards of 900,000 people, and 1 in 5 people experience suicide loss over their lifetime. I mean, we could go on and on about the statistics, Peter, as you know, but that's the why.
Statistics is important because it establishes why there is a need for these kind of things. I mean, we know that according to the World Health Organization, that the suicide has moved from a traditional sort of 40 to 55 down to as young as 25. So there's been a shift in demographics as well. I don't know if you agree or disagree with me, but this was on the rise for a while. Obviously, when we went through lockdown, mental health became a lot more public. But just to contextualize it, less than 10 years ago, not less, about 10 years ago, the suicide rate was 3,400 a day.
There's been a linear increase in those rates. We did see a small change, a decrease in the number of deaths around the pandemic, actually.
Yes, exactly.
But there's been a significant increase and a steady increase post then. So, I often we often talk about making comparisons with that figure and you know, the number of deaths in road traffic accidents in this country, and that sort of journey being relatively static over years, but the changes that have been made in road traffic safety. 3.5 times the amount of people die by suicide in this country than they do on our roads. And we've got road signs everywhere. You drive out of your house and it's like, don't drink and drive, don't drive when you're tired. Keep to the speed limit. We get arrested, or we can be charged if we've got children that aren't strapped in safely, or we're talking on our mobile phones. Yet, we're talking about people losing their life to suicide 3.5 times greater than that figure on our roads. And what does the general person know about recognizing when somebody's in distress? Or what do we say if somebody's in distress? Or if we have a gut feeling that something isn't right, are we going to talk about it? People generally don't speak about suicide because of the myths that sort of surround it. If I talk about it, I'm going to make it worse. Or if they're saying, indicating that, they're not okay, or they're not feeling okay, or you wouldn't miss me if I wasn't here, that people are joking and or they don't mean it, or they're not taking, it's not taken seriously. So we need to do more. We absolutely need to do more. It's a
That's one of the, so for our listeners, myself and Sarah are part of a BSI standard on suicide prevention within workplaces, principally because, and I think you'll be able to confirm this, when a suicide occurs, often it's somebody in an HR function or a line manager who may not have had any experience of it, and then suddenly they're having to deal with the outcome of that, or they might have a conversation with someone who's indicating suicidal ideation. So what we're trying to do is create a guide that you can just pick up in an emergency and read, aren't we?
Yeah. It's incredibly comprehensive, and there's a fantastic group of people and organizations working on drafting this, with vast experience in and around this subject. And there's a lot of really, really valuable information that has been put into the standard. It's still obviously work in progress at the moment, but what we hear, or what I hear a lot working in organizations, from organizations that have experienced the loss of someone in the workplace through suicide, or being impacted by a colleague taking their life outside of the workplace, or indeed, I do a lot of work in hospitality, people coming into hotels and organizations with the intention of ending their life. So the impact on people within that organization, from a customer, a client, or a visitor, etc. And organizations asking the questions: what do we do? How do we support our people? What do we say? Where do we go to? Is there somewhere that there's a policy on this? Is there sort of a crisis pathway that we should be following? And organizations of all sizes are asking these questions, sort of 150 staff to sort of 10,000 staff. Where do we go and what do we do? So the standard is offering that guidance to an organization. And also too, there's some really tangible, practical support and advice in there for line managers and for HR, which is absolutely fantastic. I was working with an organization only last week that and the heads of HR saying, where's the best place to go and find this information? And in a policy, what should we be thinking about? And when we, in the example that experienced a suicide in the workplace of a customer, actually, and, how do we support the people that were there in that moment? And, what do we do about that? And is there somewhere that we can go to get that information? So that's the intention, I think. And there's a huge amount that's been included in the standard that will offer support. And there's processes. And policy suggestions, content suggestions, and practical application of support, and helping people that are in immediate crisis or people that we recognise are in distress. So it's also giving practical information about, what are the signs, what are the warning signs, what are the risk factors in the workplace, what changes can a manager or leadership in an organisation make in work design to protect individuals in the workplace. So, that.
Which fits very nicely with psychosocial risk, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, that hand in hand, really.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we need to realise that actually what we're doing in this space on psychological health and safety can make a massive difference. At the end point when a crisis occurs, we need to know how to support people, but we also need to have procedures and policies in place to facilitate that. You know what I mean? So I think
And to support line managers. Line managers don't often get training around how to have difficult conversations if somebody's in distress. And what do they do to support themselves if they're in a situation where they're holding and having that conversation with somebody in distress? What pathway do they follow and what process do they follow so that they feel safe and confident in the knowledge that they've been offered, being able to offer the right support to this person? So, we always talk about training and education being sort of at the forefront and fundamental to giving people the skills to do this. But it's providing them sort of that checklist or that structure that they can go to and know that they're doing all that they possibly can in the best possible way that they can.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we're hoping this is going to be out in September, October of this year. And so it would be the first standard that's done it for a national level on this area. So yeah, it's exciting work.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So tell me, Sarah, where do you think we will need to go with mental health over the next 5 to 10 years? Because we always have this forward thought.
That's a big question, isn't it? I think if you ask lots of people that question, they'd all have a very different answer. For me, in my work and my business, and to make really impactful and sustainable change in what we do in the workplace, it has to be engaging leadership. The decision makers, the budget holders, the people that role model change and behavior, the people that are responsible for culture in an organization. And fewer than half of the UK company CEOs champion sort of mental health. So we need to make some significant changes. And I think there's processes and structures and information out there about how they do that and what they can do. There's a lot of tangible metrics that are available to organizations. But how do we make them accountable for that change, or how do we make them want to make that change? And I think that's the where we need to create the key shift in getting leaders to buy into that, the stark human and economic costs associated with poor mental health. It's a massive obstacle to a company's success. So we need to tackle the leadership issue. There's a whole host of other things as well, Peter, but I think for me, the buck stops with leadership and it starts with them as well. And so it is educating, providing knowledge, information, sort of metrics, tangible statistics that they can relate to their working populations, that are going to encourage change for them. It's happening in some industries at the moment, and that's sort of been assisted by, some of the community interest companies, some of the charities, some of the huge sort of organisations like Deloitte that are producing really tangible metrics around this, that have done engagement surveys or studies around mental health specifically in those industry sectors. I mean, you and I both know hospitality for one, construction, the work that you do in construction, TV, media, and film, all of those industries have specific metrics that apply to people that work in that sector, and that is really pushing change within those industries. So there needs to be more of that. And obviously the support infrastructure as well needs to change. And I think there's been some big shifts in that post-COVID. If we look at employee assistance programs, notoriously underutilised, the changes that are taking place to those service level agreements and occupational health and EAP providers, all of that sort of shifting and changing at the moment. So it's a two-pronged attack. But for me, the crux of change comes with knowledge and education and buy-in from senior leadership, and then it has a ripple effect down the organisation. So how do we make the biggest impact to leaders in an organisation? What do we do to change their thinking, to get them to buy into this? I think sadly organisations think that making an impact to the sort of mental health and well-being of their workers in the workplace is all about money, and we haven't got the budget and we can't spend money on that. And actually, it doesn't necessarily have to be about spending a significant amount of money. You can role model change and shift a culture of an organisation by the way that you communicate. And, I'm not sort of taking away from work design and all of the work that we do around psychosocial health and safety in an organisation, 45,003, and all of that infrastructure that needs to change in an organisation. But when you have the right people speaking about it in the right way, it can influence how people feel in the workplace, and that can have a significant impact on how people feel coming into work, how people engage, how people treat people, the safety that they feel in the workplace, and the knock-on effect to that: engagement, productivity, creativity, people feeling safe at work. I've seen massive changes in organizations where they've got great L&D and great HR teams, and they're rolling out training programs, and they've got a fantastic mental health and wellbeing calendar and agenda, but the senior leadership are not involved in that. And then when that changes, when you get the board and the senior leadership involved and they are part of that learning and education process, that's when you see significant change ripple down through the organisation, coming out there and championing that change, that language, and shifting the culture. And I had an amazing example of this years ago, working with a big utility company actually, and they were doing incredible work, but the real shift came when their leadership got involved, and we created a mental health and wellbeing policy. It was introduced at a huge sort of event, a town hall that we held, and the managing partners got up there and spoke, and we had some really fantastic speakers talking about sort of their lived experience and working in the industry, and the shift that created in that organisation was phenomenal. I got a phone call several years into that journey, working with them, from saying that they've had people that have been at home unwell, having thoughts of suicide, and calling their workplace and saying, I want to come into work and talk to somebody because that's where I feel safest. Quite incredible, really. And the big shift in sort of absenteeism and changes to productivity levels, all of that stuff we sort of measured over a period of years. But the greatest catalyst for that change in that organisation was their leadership team getting involved. So for me, in answering your question, where do we need to go? It's capturing the attention, delivering the right information, and getting their buy-in for change to create real change. That was a really long-winded way to answer your question. I don't know.
You should. It was, but you partially answered the next question, which we had there. So that's good. But no, it is. Leadership is a fundamental. Having the right leaders and the leaders being authentic and being real is important, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's I come across this in nearly every organization I work with. It's how leadership is really important. Leadership set the tone, the expectations, and so everything you sort of said, I entirely agree with. Like, you know, and actually, um, once you get somebody who gets it on in within the leadership, then it becomes a much easier task, I think, to address people. So, in your experience, do you find organizations, now that we've talked today about it, are susceptible to putting the right changes in to allow them to make appropriate plans for mental illness and suicide? This is in the context really of the review for we had a review in the UK by Farmer and Stevenson, and it looked at mental health in the context of work. So there were specific recommendations, were there not, in there? So in that sense, could you talk to that?
Well, the report and the recommendations they gave a structure and a process and a recommendation of the core components required in an organisation to create change around the subject. And you know, the goal of the report was that in 10 years' time that certain things would have changed. So what are we up to? 8 years now, and they wanted knowledge and confidence and understanding in an organisation around mental health and wellbeing to have improved. No metrics and accountability or tools for that, no percentage-wise was given. So had that happened? Yes, I believe that that's happened. I think there's been a significant change in awareness and understanding around this subject, driven by the pandemic largely, sadly. I think that's where we saw the greatest shift in the last 8 years, to reduce the proportion of people off work with long-term mental health conditions or people that leave employment each year being unwell with their mental health. Has that improved in the last 10 years? I don't believe so. In fact, I think it's got worse. How people access help and support to reduce sickness in the workplace. Has that improved? Yes, I think it probably has. I think that employee assistance programs are still notoriously underutilized, but I think that the resources that organizations have available to staff has improved. Is it a result of that report in 2017? I'm not sure. I think the report was a spark or a catalyst responsible for an increased level of activity. That doesn't necessarily correspond with an increased level of change. You know, we've got 2.6 million people in the UK out of work at the moment with long-term health conditions. And we believe that around 900,000 of those people are off because of mental health issues. So has that report created change? Yes. Has it had the impact in reducing illness in the workplace? I don't believe that it has. I think it's sort of acknowledged that companies have a moral duty to provide staff with a psychologically safe place of work, but I don't believe that there's any accountability. So without mandatory change, you know, and this is a much bigger conversation and it's different across different countries, but unless organizations are held to account for how they treat and how they look after and how they support their people, I don't know how we can make a massive dent in some of those statistics that, we're talking about. What prompts organizations to make change? Tragedy, cost, and the environment that we're working in. I mean, I'm just being very sort of black and white about it. It's much more complex than that, but organizations come and ask for change when they are really concerned about the welfare of their staff. That happened post the pandemic or during the pandemic. Organizations I work with will come to me when they have experienced a tragedy or a loss of someone through suicide, or staff have been impacted by the suicide of somebody in the workplace. And then they want to make changes. And it's really sad. I think organizations are starting to realize that safeguarding the mental health of their people is also safeguarding their economic success. And I think we have to, if we're talking about a business, those two have to come together.
The fact that a crisis shouldn't be the instigator, but the harsh reality is that is the case, is it not? That. So I think the principles of the Stevenson Pharma Review and the mental health policies positive. Obviously, we weren't predicting that we would go into a global pandemic and the associated stuff that was with that, but I think. I'm glad we have them, but I'm more minded as you are that actually if you start doing a mandatory element as they've done in Australia, I think we're going to get even more of a response to it. And then we do have the regulations here. It's not like, as you know, I've when I was at HSC, I issued several notices. You can do regulatory work in this area. So
I think, well, there's lots of components, but I think ultimately organizations have to be held to account, and they have infrastructure, information, and available to them about how to do it and what's best practice and what works. All of that information exists. And there's been some positive changes. There's been, we'll just keep the states aside from this at the moment with the changes that have taken place there. But, a massive increase in awareness around diversity, the disparities that people face within organizations, data-driven insights, massive changes, and we've spoken about this prior to today about what's happening in certain industry sectors that are really sort of pushing forward for collaboration of industries within that, or organizations within that industry sector, to make really significant change. We see it in hospitality, we see it in construction, we see it in professional services with the CCLA and what they did in 2022. And TV, film, and media. So there's lots of collaborative initiatives that are taking place that are really, really positive and influencing development of strategy and policies to support people around mental health and wellbeing, and actionable recommendations for changes in framework and how people are supported in the workplace. So lots of things have happened as a result of the report that came out in 2017, but there's a lot more work to do.
If this was a school report, it would be doing well, but could areas of improvement. Yeah.
Talks too much and doesn't focus on the point.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. Actually, that could have been my entire. School report for about 8 years. There's a story. Which is a nice lead into my final question. What's the one thing you would tell your younger self now, coming into the profession, that you're in with regards to mental health? One thing.
Oh, what's yours?
To listen. To listen.
To listen. Okay, that's interesting. I
Well,
think,
I think it's more than that. I mean, but yeah, listening is very important. Listen to the stories that people are telling you, and understand that.
yeah, I think, um, well, that's a huge question. But for me, it's about investigating, I guess, or understanding what makes the biggest impact on people to help support them. So what is the one thing that I could do really, really well that's going to make a difference to an individual or to a group of people or to a team or to an organization? What's the one thing that would really empower change? And you have to listen to people, like you say, to work out what that is. Um, for me, education's key because, like we've spoken about with the standard and around suicide, people aren't informed, people aren't educated around the subject, what to look out for and how to have conversations and what support to offer. And so for me, it would be going back thinking, actually, working in this field for so many years, there's so much that I have learned that makes a difference to simple things that can make a difference to people. So it's gathering that information early and being able to make those changes, yeah, I think. I mean, I could talk about boundary management and self-care and all of those things, which are all really important. But for me, you know, what's the one thing that I could do that would create the biggest impact to make someone feel better or support someone or to save a life? It would be that.
And that's why I say listen, because actually spending time with people and hearing their stories and hearing their theories and it's like being a sponge. You learn from the people around you, which is a very nice ending to this podcast. So, well, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on and having a chat. Look forward to seeing you at the meeting this afternoon.
Yes.
For
See
for
you in a
the
couple of hours.
to the next drafting panel, and for those of you interested, we have weekly meetings. Yeah, so that should be good. So thank you very much, and it leaves me
Thanks,
just
Peter.
that's welcome, and it leaves me just to thank all of our listeners, and obviously the different platforms that you're listening on. We look forward to engaging with you. Come and visit both of us on LinkedIn, say hi, and hopefully that will that's the end. Thank you.
See you later.
See you later indeed.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.